Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How are you going, Zack?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I think when this comes out, we will be on our way to Germany or in Germany.
Yeah, that's right. That's exciting.
That is very exciting. Lots of great interviews coming up, but also some really good stuff going on stateside as well, and some really cool experiences that you've been chatting to people about. So really keen to get stuck into that. So why don't we do a quick shout out to our sponsors, and then we'll get into the interview.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Tell us a little bit about Wyeth Architects. How did you come across this team?
They're leaders in the Connecticut Passive House scene, and they I think they're founding members of that scene. So we learned about their work via that. And as you'll hear in the interview, there's some really interesting retrofit work that they've been doing and a long history of sustainability work. And so it's a really, really cool case study with their retrofitted farmhouse that you'll hear. It was, I think, quite the adventure.
And just for context, I had to look it up, but you do talk about the difference in climate between Connecticut and where you are in Seattle. Sounds like it gets a bit cold in Connecticut.
It gets a lot colder in Connecticut. Yes. Seattle is, rainy, think kind of London kind of weather, and Connecticut. Yeah, there are really cold winters.
Yeah.
And really, you'll hear, really expensive energy. So a really strong case for Passive House for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it, and we'll have a chat afterwards.
Well, I have Leonard Wyeth, Principal and Architect at Wyeth Architecture, and Sara Holmes, Architect at Wyeth Architecture, here for a conversation on the Passive House podcast. Leonard and Sara, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It is great to have you here. I should also mention that Leonard is the president and Sara is the secretary of Connecticut Passive House. So I'm really looking forward to diving into the work that Connecticut Passive House is doing as part of this conversation. But I thought before we do that, if maybe we could start with what got you into architecture in the first place, and how did you get involved and connected to Passive House practice?
It's kind of a roundabout route. Went off to university having no clue as to what the future would bring. That's what happens when you go to a liberal arts college. And the focus in the very beginning was theology and philosophy. And by the end of the first year, I realized that has implications as to what you do after university.
True.
And I really had no interest in teaching, and I'd make a lousy vicar. So the next The next thing was art history. That led to design. Design led to architecture. And by the end of the second year, I was enrolled in the architecture department. One thing led to another, and the path was cast at that point. What about you?
Yeah, I have a similarly crooked line. I'd say it was somewhere between, Lego and theater that got me here. But just, loving to build things as a kid. And then when it came time for college, I thought I wanted to be an architect, but then kind of chickened out. So I went to Skidmore College in upstate New York, which is a great liberal arts school with a great theater program. So I studied technical theater there, which is an important distinction because I never want to be on stage. The only reason I would be on stage is if I was dressed in black and moving scenery around. But through that, there was a wonderful professor there, did a lot of stage design, lighting design. And then I felt that, architecture is it. Did grad school, and here we are.
Absolutely. I can relate to the crooked path. Definitely. Yes. I have one myself. I
think every project we do has an interesting backstory. It's not, and we get to learn a lot, and we both, everybody draws on, our crooked paths and our backgrounds. So it all informs everything we're doing today.
Definitely. And how about the area of sustainable design and passive house design? That might be related to some of that crooked path, I imagine, but how did that start becoming part of your lives?
Early in my career, I got involved with doing research for, at the tail end, NASA was doing research with one of the firms where I worked on insulation. And they were keenly interested in super insulation. So I got started in that. One thing led to another. And in the kind of second decade of working, I was teaching adults about solar energy. So they were basic interests in the background, running past the workday. That is before Passive House even existed. And once we became aware of what a German PhD was doing with kind of in-depth research, we got intrigued, both of us at about the same time, not necessarily for exactly the same reasons. And by God, we had an opportunity to be trained. We knew it was a good idea. We had no idea how difficult it was going to be, but that's okay. And somehow we got certified. But once you follow that path, boy, there's no turning back. You then see the entire profession different. It's an amazing transition.
Yeah, and Leonard has been doing what we would now call sustainable work. For decades. Sorry. But, new green building is not new to us with learning about Passive House. He's been doing it for a long time. I can't really put a finger on when sustainability, green building, green living entered my life. It's just been there the whole time. I've always been conscious of it. So architecture is a nice way to use it in my, professional life, daily life.
Yeah, right. It's kind of a privilege to be able to do that, I imagine.
It is.
Yeah. So I want to explore more of that and how Passive House has influenced and maybe, guided the way that you design. But before we do that, maybe we could do a little kind of context setting about the practice that Wyeth Architects has, your portfolio. Like, what kinds of projects do you do? What's a kind of quick description of the firm and its work?
equal opportunity would be the description. We really, really enjoy a variety of different work. And it's hard to tell what's going to come through the door at any given time. One thing always leads, it's never a straight line, it leads somewhere else. Right now on the boards, we have, and it's almost coincidental, we're working on 2 libraries. We just finished a theater. There are 2 state-recognized Native American tribes that have approached us for 2 community centers, which is a particularly interesting design challenge because they're on different reservations, which are sovereign land. So the rules change when you're in that environment. However, they have a special long history of direct connection to the land. So it's intriguing to us. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And there's residential projects. It's what I think is interesting about particularly our residential projects is that people come to us knowing about Passive House now.
That's exciting.
It's out there. And whether or not those things turn into certified projects, it's different with every case, but people are coming to us knowing, and maybe they don't know the term Passive House, but they know about efficiency and sustainability, and it's pretty exciting. There's less of a pitch we have to do.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent. What sort of percentage of your work would you say is it falls into that category of Passive House, or at least starts Passive House, or with an energy efficient focus? I mean, is that how much of that is of your portfolio today? Do you think that
all of it? Yes,
all of it. Fantastic. Yeah. Well done.
Well, it's unavoidable. First of all, once you approach a building that way, is there any chance that on the next project you're going to ignore it? It's 100% of the work because there's no other way to do it. And this is, I'm not trying to get preachy or what have you, but with global warming and what have you, if 40%, according to the EPA, more than 40% of the energy used in America is by buildings. That would imply that there is no possible solution, 2030, 2050, that doesn't directly involve buildings.
Hallelujah.
In a major way. And that being the case, it kind of becomes a crime not to pay attention to it. So we found and I'm struggling to articulate it because it's not that conscious, but virtually every project that comes in, you have to approach it that way, or it feels that way. It almost becomes a moral imperative.
Right.
I would say all of our projects are Passive House inspired. So whether that means, an inch of insulation versus 6 inches of insulation, or how we treat thermal bridges or what have you, it's all inspired by those basic principles.
And what role does modeling play in your practice? Like, is for a project that isn't necessarily going to make it all the way to Passive House certification, are you able to use the modeling in your practice, or what does that look like?
Yes. All buildings, first of all, all buildings are approached with modeling in mind. Not every building requires a full-blown PHPP package or WFI, but all projects require, I'm measuring the words here, but require at least an intuitive knowledge of what each move is going to mean.
Yeah, the first Passive House project we did, we really dove into PHPP and really started messing around just kind of to see what would happen. Just to intuitively understand the almost like the snowball effect of, small changes here and there.
Right. Sort of watching the building
Watching
science
the numbers
implications
change. Yeah.
unfold. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
It's a great tool.
Just before we went on, we were running some numbers out of curiosity, kind of testing an intuitive theory. And I'll just run through them it gives you an example of everybody's kind of gut response is you need more insulation. It's really obvious when you run the numbers that infiltration is a much bigger deal.
Mm-hmm.
So we were just running some numbers on a simple building, call it 32 by 32 by 18 with a pitched roof. If it's built to code with 3 air changes an hour, every hour of heat loss through the structure, there's 11.7 times that much heat through infiltration.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's with a well-insulated building.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you start getting a sense of each move you make, how important is it to the outcome, if that makes any sense.
Right. Start with airtightness. Yeah.
So even when full analysis isn't run, we're constantly trying to be able to quickly intuitively measure what the value of each move is.
Right. And what role does blower door testing play then in your projects?
It's essential.
Yeah.
In other words, you can't possibly measure whether you've achieved any level of airtightness without a solid proof of what is accomplished. On our first passive house building, we were able to get the air changes by blower door test, the air changes per hour down to 0.18. And as you know, 0.6 is acceptable as a maximum for passive house.
Yeah.
3 is acceptable by code. But it's possible to do so much better.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. So this gets to this question of how passive house and building science in general is impacting and kind of shaping your work. I think. Can we dive into that deeper? Like, how do you see it changing your approach to design? How has it evolved your practice over the years?
Do you want to take the first run at that, or you want? Okay. There was a hearty debate last week at the Connecticut AIA on design in general. The evolving sense of design in the profession is multifaceted. In other words, there is no such thing as looking at a building, deciding it's beautiful, and calling it a great design.
Right.
The way the building functions is great design. The way the materials interact is great design.
Mm-hmm.
Its environmental performance is involved in great design. The choice of materials and their impact on the environment is major for design.
Right.
There is no way one can approach design. It still has to be a great building. It still has to work really well, but it also has to be incredibly environmentally sensitive, both in its materials and its performance, energy performance, and no fossil fuels. It's evolving, but that's not losing sight. It's not a great building just if it is energy efficient.
Nor is it a great building if it just looks beautiful.
Right.
We have so often we've heard people define architects' roles as making buildings pretty. That cuts very deeply.
Yeah, no kidding. Right, because you're taking responsibility for the occupant experience, the performance of the building, and maybe there was a luxury of letting go of that when we weren't aware of the threat of the climate crisis and the impacts of all this active heating equipment that we were putting into this modernist design. But times have changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is bizarre that we've reached a point where the equipment is concerned, but it's a real success when you have no idea it's there.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, which is funny, a funny thing about passive house design in general, there's so much that's hidden and just doing its thing in the background.
Yep.
Not flashy.
Right.
So why don't we talk about, so are you in your new office now?
Yes.
During this interview? And so this is it's an 18th century colonial building. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Well, it was put together in 3 pieces.
Yeah.
This is what we came to learn in the process of ripping it apart.
Uh-huh.
The original piece, the best information we have was 1749.
Mm-hmm.
It was expanded upward in 1776. And at some point, probably in the early 1800s, an older barn was moved and attached to it on the back. So the old barn, we have no idea where it came from, but it might predate even the 1749. But,
Sure.
But in the end, it was kind of an unholy mess, settling uneasily on the side of a hill, left to rot for long periods and then fixed and left to rot again. And it has tilted, bent, wobbled and
Slid a little bit
and taken on a wonderful character where there is not a plumb vertical surface in it. There's not a flat floor. But it actually is. It's a wonderful thing. We also had something to prove here, which was we have repeatedly heard there are some things you can't do with old building stock. For example, make it energy efficient.
Right.
And the older, the harder. And this is the perfect example in my mind of an impossible building. In other words, a central chimney classical colonial building, where the common knowledge is you can't seal it. Well, yes, you can. It can be done. And boy, what it yields is a really comfortable, quiet, full of character, full of light, and with all of the original stuff exposed that is possible.
Yeah. I mean, I can see some of that on this Zoom screen as we're doing this recording. And is that natural light behind you too that's streaming in?
This stuff over here?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's great. Yeah, it looks wonderful. So how did you seal it?
Well, it's a good thing. We're completely off the record. Nobody will ever hear this, right?
Oh, yeah, right. No, this podcast is totally off the record. Yes.
Oh, good. Perfect. Historians might react.
I see. I won't tell them. I promise.
Oh, good. Because the original building is post and beam with heavy sheathing on the outside. In other words, post and beam, hand-hewed beams on the site, and then milled sheathing, but still rough. So the sheathing is in fact 18 to 20 inches wide, 2 inches thick. That's a lot of wood.
Yeah.
In a building.
Yeah.
And what we came to realize is that actually is what's holding these old buildings up. The posts and beams have no lateral support.
Yeah.
The real strength and the reason that they continue to stand is because of the solid wood that clouds them on the outside.
Right.
So the strategy for actually preserving that, protecting it, was to put all of the insulation on the outside of the building, then use the outer layer for the air barrier and seal it. We are not a major moisture producer in here. There are no hot tubs, and people are taking showers every day. And
it's an office. Yeah. Yeah.
So it made that opportunity possible, and it also made it possible to preserve virtually everything that we possibly could. Unless it was completely rotted, it's still here.
Yeah, cool.
And by doing that, also, it gave us the opportunity to have thermal bridge-free design, because our envelope isn't just the walls, or it goes from below grade up and over the roof and what have you. So we ended up with this completely sealable box on the outside, and then carefully recreated the original details. In other words, there were little sections of crown molding from the original building, and it gave us the opportunity to recreate those out of recycled materials, boral in this case, so they could be matched exactly. Then we could actually put those all back the way they were originally. And it gave us the opportunity, because we had rigid insulation on the outside, we could shape it a little bit to take up some of the dips and settling that had taken place, so that when we put concrete fiber clapboards back on the building, they could actually be level. And then we consciously leveled the windows, despite the flow of the post and beam. So
got it. Yeah.
On the outside, it looks like the building is in excellent original shape, and on the inside, the window trim varies from 1/2 inch to 4 or 5 inches.
Wow.
Because of the slope of all the posts and beams. In other words, it's a heightened experience on the inside, which is part of the charm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if that's making sense, in a nutshell, it was seal the outside. And then that gives the opportunity to really expose all the posts and beams on the inside.
Yeah, that's nice.
And last but not least, we were very careful with the sheetrock to have it come close to, but not touch any of the original structure. Because the other aspect of this building is it's been damp for 270 years. So there's no question that it's going to go through a drying process and a shrinking process. And if all of the new materials touch the old materials, God knows what a mess they'd be after a year or two. So
that's smart.
We built in these gaps so that it can slowly fit itself back together, which seems to be working.
Yep. One of the fun things we got to preserve is when we were taking walls apart, first we found lots of very interesting wallpaper. So that was fun. Wallpaper styles over the years, but also newspapers on the walls, which of course was the original air barrier. So there are newspapers from 1777. So cool. Which are, readable. It's the Connecticut Gazette, and talks about the Continental Congress and goings on in Philadelphia and London, and it's pretty fun. So we have that behind some plexiglass.
Yeah. And do you have this on your website? Do you have photos yet of the project?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. We will make sure to. I was just looking around for it. What is it called?
It's called 6 Maple Street.
Yep. Right at the top left. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so you can see the photographs of the newspapers in there.
Oh, yeah. Great. Well, we'll share that with everybody in show notes, so they can see that.
One of the great things too is the light in here, which you're sort of getting behind us. But when we put in new windows, and by the way, I will note that when we purchased the building, the siding was not original, nor were the windows. So we didn't perform any heinous acts of destroying original fabric, which was actually a blessing in disguise, I think.
Yeah, right.
But people who come in here remark it's very light and airy, and it, feels really good in here. And we have LED lighting around, so it's a nice uplifting space now, where typically, old buildings like this are dark.
No, it looks very airy and light filled.
We broke a few rules on the outside, which the historians don't seem to have gotten too upset about, like the roofs that look like they're melting at the entry, things like that, which are a fun challenge because our structural engineers still haven't figured out how we did it.
That's beautiful. Very unique too. Fantastic. Well, good work. It must feel really gratifying to be in that space.
It does. It feels really good.
And it's also a great test case to show people how comfortable passive houses are. That's something that is, as you know, I'm sure, very hard to explain to somebody, particularly where we are in New England. Everybody's used to drafty, cold houses. It's just the way of life. You put on another sweater.
Mm-hmm.
You don't sit next to the windows in the winter. You might have, a heating system that you hear, blowing air at you. But to sit in here, we're dressed comfortably. We had a snowstorm last night. Or to sit in our conference room with the mechanical system going, and we point out that it's running. We cause dramatic effect, and it's quiet. It's a great showcase to talk about comfort.
In the old office, she was always wrapped in a shawl.
Sweater. Yeah. Good. Mention the -7 degree day.
Oh yeah, we've moved in a year ago, so we've only been here a year. As you know, it was very cold a couple of weeks ago, so it was delightful to run over to this building at dawn when it was -7 to see how hard the systems were working. They were all working on low. They were really happy.
Yeah.
70 degrees inside from corner to corner, and all the systems were on low.
That's another thing our clients like to hear about is mechanical systems not working hard and being cost efficient, which is something that's really come up in Connecticut. We've had a significant electricity price increase recently, so that is at the forefront.
Yeah.
Where are you located?
I'm located in Seattle, so our reality is different on the conversation around the cost of energy, because energy is not expensive in Seattle. But I know that in New England it's a different story.
It just went from 12 cents a kilowatt hour to 24 on January 1st.
Whoa, that's huge.
That makes us the most expensive in the country.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's just yet another good reason to make the transition to Passive House. I think also just the experiential, the opportunity to experience, for a client to experience a Passive House and how different it is from a regular building is. I mean, there's just you can talk about comfort all you want, but and quiet and just that solid feeling that you get inside of a Passive House, but until you experience that on a cold February day inside and you're cozy, there's no substitute.
There's a subtle thing that goes on when clients come in. They see us take our shoes off.
Yeah.
So here it is, winter in New England, and they wander into the conference room in bare feet.
Right.
And quickly figure out that their feet are warm. And that there are no radiant floors or anything like that. It's just
that reminds me. So in talk, over the years, I'm sure you all have had these conversations in Connecticut too, about how to communicate about the benefits of Passive House, or communicate like what is Passive House to newbies. And Tessa Bradley, I think, coined the term. I think that it was her term of barefooted comfort. As one of the selling points.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of what's going on in Connecticut, tell us about Connecticut Passive House. I mean, are you? I imagine that you're involved in helping out the practitioners. Are you involved in policy work? I know there's some interesting stuff around LITEX, the low-income housing tax credits there. What's new in Connecticut on the Passive House front?
Well, yes, we are increasingly involved in policy because I guess there's no choice.
Yeah.
There have been New England is doing pretty well. New York State and Massachusetts are doing very well. Both Massachusetts with stretch codes. New York City has been marvelous in adopting Passive House standards to much of their building codes, which is really amazing, especially in that environment.
Yeah.
Connecticut is it's a little bit behind those, and we're doing our best to try to get them to speed up and catch up. But there's no avoiding policy. The consciousness, we're working as hard as we can just to raise general awareness of Passive House. And sometimes it's very frustrating because sometimes it feels like you're making headway and sometimes it doesn't. But clearly, the situation with global warming is causing people to seek some kind of alternative or answers or paths to follow. And so we're doing our damnedest to be waving our hands and going, hey,
yeah,
here's something that you might consider.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking to the tax credits, a few years ago, so we have low-income housing tax credits through the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. And a few years ago, we worked very hard for a few rounds to get and maintain Passive Houses being a path for developers. And it's hung in there. And we've heard from people in other states that they're impressed that we've been able to maintain that as a tax credit path.
And by God, there is a fair amount of low-income housing that is now being built to Passive House standards, which is great.
That is exciting.
It makes so much sense. Passive House for affordable housing.
This is extremely subtle, but this morning we were coming to realize on a project that otherwise that involved the renovation of an old portion of a library. The new portion was obviously going to be up to Passive House standards, but there was considerable amount of old portion that was not intended for that. And this morning, because of incentives from Energize Connecticut, from the Eversource, from the power suppliers, we discovered that that opens the door with the client to the possibility of considering bringing their entire structure up. Nice.
Yeah.
And this, it's extremely subtle, but getting your foot in that door is hard. And this actually might work. So there are many pans on the stove.
Yeah. Right. And you seize progress where you can. Yeah, definitely.
Well, Connecticut Passive House started off pretty organically. It was a group of us were taking a class from the Passive House Academy, and we did pretty well. But there wasn't a Passive House group, and it was Tomas O'Leary was giving the class, and he said, "You guys should start a group in Connecticut." And so we just kind of went, "Oh, okay." So, it may have been 5 of us from that group, plus some other people, founded Passive House. Must have been, let's see, I want to say 2018?
Yeah.
Or 2017. And it's been really, I've so enjoyed the group of people, just it's a volunteer group. So just the people involved who are the co-founders, but also the people we meet. Everybody's just really passionate, and it's fun for it to be an avenue to connect with these people. One of our more popular activities is site visits. Of course, everybody likes to look at the guts of a building, but it's really fun to stand back and watch people help each other out. I mean, we're all resources for each other, and it's networking, but it's connecting with people, and we're all in this together.
Yeah. And it's a generous community, really. Yeah. That's been my experience.
Yeah. So we've focused on, as Leonard said, all sorts of aspects, but one of them is supporting professionals, whether it's consultants, designers, builders, tradespeople. We've partnered with Energize Connecticut, which is an initiative by the electric utilities, gas utilities, and the state and other green organizations to offer reimbursements for Passive House training. So there's free programs that are offered right now. Of course, they're webinars because we're all in COVID land still.
Yeah.
So they're free webinars, and Energize CT will reimburse 75% training costs.
Awesome.
It's really great. And so that's helping to push people to pursue certification in the state. And I mean, we have really good attendance. So
Connecticut Passive House turned around and said, okay, we'll do the other 25%. And the phone has started to ring.
Hey, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's smart. It's a good lever to pull for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so what's coming up next for you? What's on the horizon?
Oh, there you go.
We just finished. We mentioned this theater that we talked about. It was a renovation, and we're really excited about that. The theater group, it's called Legacy Theater. It's a wonderful group of people. It's a community theater, but they offer all sorts of different programming, family programs, Broadway programs. We're close enough to New York City, so they get some great talent there. It's a teaching theater. So we're enjoying seeing that blossom.
Yeah, back to your roots a little bit.
Exactly. It came full circle. It felt really great. It really did feel like everything was coming together. So I'm really proud of that. I think we as an office are very proud of that. And while that was not a Passive House project, we, of course, as we've been saying, used Passive House principles there. And one neat aspect there is they happen to be located right next to the Amtrak lines. So one of the perks of Passive House is quiet.
Yeah, no kidding.
So some of the, outer envelope techniques that we used there has helped them out.
Right. So you
and
have a quiet scene in a dramatic production, and
yes, and then
you don't hear the train.
Estella zooms by.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And also it being a nonprofit organization, certainly any relief that their building can offer to their budget, low energy, low cost to run, helps them out a lot.
Right.
Yeah, there was just looking towards the future. It's interesting to me what is slowly morphing. Back in 2017, or very shortly after we were certified in Passive House, we were asked by some building inspectors to give a presentation of Passive House because they were wondering whether this was going to be something that they would have to deal with.
Right.
And we met a group of them. I don't remember exactly how large, and the immediate response after it
was probably 30 or 40 people.
Wow. Yeah.
The immediate response after the presentation was the first time it was not well received, as you would imagine. Mm-hmm. There were a whole bunch of old time building inspectors, which are many times people that had been in the building trades. And of course, they were coming up objecting vigorously, going, "That's not the way we do it, son."
Right. Yeah.
That sort of thing. And, that building's too tight. No, that'll be dangerous for the occupants. You can't insulate a building that way. You think of the condensation. In other words, they were not familiar with the full science of it. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, it was only about 3 years. We were invited by another group of building inspectors to make a similar presentation. In that short period of time, something had changed. We're probably about 30. All 30, we presented for 45 minutes or so. All 30 charged the stage, and they were there for a good half an hour or 40 minutes more, just peppering with questions. All 30 were fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something in that short period had really changed.
Yeah.
And as I look forward, just like we are now beginning to see clients who are walking through looking for Passive House, where in the very recent past, they were still asking, what the hell is this? So it's marching forward, it's morphing. And the more people that know about it and understand the impact globally, in combination with other issues like the correct choice of materials and what have you, which are generally outside of what Passive House calls for. The general public's understanding is marching forward, and the future looks actually quite bright for that.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Leonard and Sara, this has been really wonderful. I really appreciate your time and sharing your insights and your practice and your awesome new office. Thank you for being part of this, and I hope we'll see each other soon.
Good, me too. It's great to see you. Thanks.
And that was Leonard Wyeth and Sara Holmes from Wyeth Architects. Awesome. Really enjoyed that, listening to that chat, Zack. I really loved the reference to Lego and stage production.
Yeah, no kidding.
I thought that was kind of nice framing of Passive House. It kind of made me think about setting the stage. You know, in some ways, Passive House sets the stage for performance. You know, like it's a different type of performance, but that idea of an architect being the person who's running around in black, you can't see them because a lot of the things in Passive House, like you said, are invisible. They're the things that are behind the walls, but they're all the things that make the show happen and make the performance. So it's kind of a nice parallel there.
It is definitely. It was fun to hear about her background, and I can relate. I was also in the performing arts, although I was on stage, but the folks who are making it all happen are just so vital, just like architects.
That's right. And also related to that, Leonard, yourself, I think a lot of people who end up doing Passive House stuff, there aren't very many straight, short journeys towards Passive House because just by nature, I mean, you don't yet go to university to become a Passive House designer. It's you usually get there through some other route, and quite often, if you've got experience doing construction or something else, then that all adds to that. Leonard mentioned a few times the contribution of buildings and the awareness of climate change. And of course, now there's this heightened awareness in Connecticut of really high power prices. But I also really liked what he said. Now, in the US, there's a 40% contribution to climate change emissions comes from the building sector. It's a little bit different in different parts of the world. It's less where I am. But globally, it's around 40% figure. And I think it's easy to look at that and think, well, that's quite a big chunk, but it's not the majority, But as Leonard put it, there is no pathway to solving climate change that doesn't involve buildings. It doesn't involve us, anyone who's in the building sector, doing something about it, because it is such a large piece of that pie. And I thought that was a really good way of framing that. It's just puts it into context and say, and he went on to say, it's almost criminal if you don't do anything about it because of the influence the built sector does have.
That's so true. I think that once this is published, we will have also published an article that Skylar Swinford and I just wrote for the Passive House Accelerator magazine and also the website that dives into embodied carbon and operational carbon, and specifically looks also at the Falcon curve, which is this problem that we have in heating dominated climates and actually across the US. So when you look at the United States in aggregate, there's this massive Falcon curve, which is because if people have heard of the duck curve, it's kind of a play on that, right? But it shows that there are huge winter peaks in demand for heating energy in our buildings because our buildings are so energy inefficient. And so the Falcon, the reason it's called a Falcon is that there are these two wings that go up on the either side of the graph, reaching into January on both sides. So these wings of demand, and then a kind of a body that shows cooling demand, which is much smaller than heating demand. And as we do the clean energy transition, we're going to be electrifying all of that demand. And fortunately, we'll have heat pumps, which will be more efficient. So that'll help bring the wings down a little bit. We can also rely on some wind energy, but solar energy is not going to help us at all with that problem. It's a serious problem and obstacle to a successful clean energy transition. And a very powerful answer to that problem or solution to that problem is deep energy efficiency in buildings via things like Passive House. So topical,
including retrofits, which they had a pretty incredible example of, and indeed bring their clients into, which, as you mentioned at the top of the show, is a great showroom for a Passive House office to bring people into an environment that is performing so well that you can take your shoes off in the middle of winter.
Yeah, no kidding.
I really also like that the story that they told, and I had to rush home and look at the I was out when I was listening to your chat, and I had to come home and immediately find Wyeth Architects to look at the images. So people should definitely go and check that out, have a look at the show notes, and head over to wyetharchitects.com and look for that 6 maple building. It's quite stunning. But yeah, just the idea of combining heritage and Passive House, there's obviously the technical challenges of that. But I also see the heritage challenges of wrapping a building on the outside, because we often think of that being where the beauty is the stone or the facade or the whatever the outside of the building is. That's because that's what most people see. When you're driving through a city or something, you're seeing all these beautiful buildings. They're beautiful because of how they look on the outside. So wrapping buildings up and externally insulating them is going to be tricky if you want to maintain the outside of the building. But I really like what they've done with this building, which is put the emphasis on the heritage of the inside and exposing some of that history, including pretty incredible newspapers.
Yeah, no kidding.
But all that timber, all the interior linings and the wonkiness of it, nothing's level, and that's the beauty of it. So I don't think there's not going to be a solution that fits to every single building, but I'm intrigued by that philosophy of putting something, wrapping a building up and having a lot of the beauty and the heritage preserved in the inside as much as it is at the external face. Right.
And recognizing that good architecture is also how the building performs and how people feel in it. And, that this more holistic and expansive understanding of the role of the architect. Yeah. Awesome stuff. Great little test case, beautiful images, and some really great messages in that. So thank you, Zack. Really enjoyed that. Yeah, thanks, Matthew. We're going to run through some upcoming stuff, or is it just busy at the moment? No, indeed we should. So when this airs, it'll be airing, I think, on Tuesday, March 7th. So then March 8th, we have a next gen edition of the Passive House Accelerator live show with AJ Patton, who is presenting about How am I building 2 passive house mixed-use developments at the same time? So AJ Patton is a very inspirational developer who's based in Chicago and is doing some trailblazing work there. So not to be missed. And then on Thursday, March 9th, we have a component spotlight with Owens Corning. We're going to be joined by Tiffany Kopak, who is going to be presenting Reaching Zero Installation Solutions from Owens Corning. So come with your technical questions ready for the Owens Corning team at that component spotlight. Then on the next Wednesday, we have a project showcase edition of Passive House Accelerator Live on March 15th, and that's going to feature Julie Klump of Preservation of Affordable Housing, and she will be presenting on the Salem Heights project, Challenges that Led to Opportunities. This is a massive retrofit of an occupied building to passive house north of Boston. So really, really cool project. Also, we're going to be at the International Passive House Conference this week. So we are going to be doing a bunch of podcast interviews as part of our visit there in Wiesbaden. So I want to give a shout out to the supporters who are making that possible for us. So big thank you to Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Inotech Windows, Minitaire, and Proclima. And we're also co-hosting with the Passive House Institute, the conference party, which happens on Friday night. And so a big thank you to EnerSign and Rothoblas USA for underwriting that party. I think that's it. There's a bunch of other stuff coming up in the community. And we'll include a link to our weekly list of links in the Passive House Weekly in show notes.